Okay, we'll get started. Welcome, I'm Ellen Morehouse, Executive Director at Student Assistance Services, and this is our Tuesday Talks About Teens. Today's presentation is going to be from Andrea Fallick. Andrea is the Director of School-Based Programs at Student Assistance Services. She's a licensed clinical social worker and credentialed alcohol and substance abuse counselor and a credentialed prevention professional. She has many years of experience providing consultation to parents, school districts, and others about responding to bullying and preventing bullying. Today will be our last Tuesday talks for the summer. We're going to resume the day after Labor Day in September. All of our talks for the spring can be found on our website, sascorp.org. Andrew will speak for approximately 20 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity to ask questions via the chat function. If you want to ask your question anonymously, please use Slido. That's SLI.do. So with that, I'm going to welcome Andrea Fallick. Andrea, you're on.
Thank you, Ellen. There are decades of research that affirm that we're not there yet. If we could just go back to the other slide, Samson. Thank you. So as an introduction, I just want to say that there are now decades of research that affirm that being involved in bullying, either as a victim or bullying others, has serious potential negative consequences. And this is an important topic for anyone who's involved with teens. It's particularly important for parents because while it is painful, and we'll talk more about this, for teens who are bullied, for parents, it's a very frustrating and difficult situation because they frequently don't know what to do and who to turn to. There is research to confirm that parents can have a powerful impact on mediating the impact of the negative consequences. So that's why I am really glad to have an opportunity to talk to people today about what parents can do. So we can go to the next slide now. So always when we talk about it, I want to make sure that we are on the same page. And so just to spend a little bit of time, what pops out here from the CDC control, CDC has a Bureau of Prevention, and they, a few years ago, got a panel of experts who took a couple of years to define bullying. And what pops out is that it is intentional, has a potential to be repeated, and what it means that, what the definition means by that, it may not be observable. Those may be things like where a teen lies in the social hierarchy in a school, or the economic status of the parent, or some other situation that a parent is in, if it's known that they've had a drug or alcohol problem. And this fourth bullet is really important. This doesn't mean that kids can't physically defend themselves. What this means is they cannot make it stop. And in terms of adolescence, this can have a profound impact. So it is part of growing up to have situations where we are embarrassed, where we feel like our friends have let us down, where we are betrayed. And actually learning to rebound from some of those situations is an important skill for teens to develop. But not all of those situations are necessarily bullying. So while bullying is the most frequent form of youth aggression, there are times when the behaviors I just mentioned can morph into bullying, and sometimes they're not. In terms of cyberbullying, the same definition applies, except that it's through the use of digital communication, meaning internet or cell phones. What the New York State Department of Education adds to this definition is that the impact is so pervasive that it compromises the well-being of a child in that their educational experience is compromised, they have fear of being physically hurt, and or they are so emotionally distressed that they can't participate in the full educational process. So the next slide, please. What I'd like to look at, that looks like a lot of data, I'm not going to bombard you with data, but what I'd like to look at is 3 significant consequences associated with being bullied. And this data comes from high school students in New York State. It's the most recent data that has been released and analyzed from the New York State Youth Behavior Risk Survey. And what this data looks like is they look at students who reported being bullied either in school or electronically, and they compare the alcohol and substance use, and we're talking about current use, which is in the last 30 days. They compare that to the use of kids who, teens, this is high school teens, who report not being bullied. And as you can see, for alcohol, there is a big difference between those who used alcohol within the last 30 days who were bullied in school compared to those who did not report bullying, and likewise to those who reported electronic bullying. And 21% of the students reported being bullied in school, and a little less, about 18%, reported being bullied electronically. We can go to the next slide. So the list that you see here before the data on the bottom, I've listed here what the dynamics associated with depression are. These dynamics really closely parallel the experience of teens who have been bullied. What the New York State Risk Behavior Survey looks at, and this was data that was released in 2018, most recent data, is it compares high school teens who reported being bullied in school or electronically to those who don't, and looked at their experience of experiencing sadness or hopelessness, 2 key characteristics of those who are depressed. And the data is really alarming. So when you look at these numbers, those who reported being bullied in school, 57% of them reported feeling sad or hopeless over the last 12 months compared to 25% who did not. And then in terms of being electronically bullied, over 55% who reported being electronically bullied reported being sad or helpless, compared to 24%, almost 25% who did not. Another stunning piece of data, which I don't have up here from the same survey, is that 42% of the high school students who reported being electronically bullied reported that in the last year they had seriously considered suicide. And that's compared to 12% who seriously considered suicide but had not reported being electronically bullied. The last piece of data that I want to look at, and what affects adolescents who are victimized is thank you, Samson, is the association between students who are a victim of bullying and anxiety. Now, the New York State survey didn't measure this, but there is lots of evidence in peer-reviewed journal articles that say that if you are a victim of bullying, you have a higher likelihood, never destined, but a higher likelihood of experiencing anxiety, particularly social anxiety, which is feeling really uncomfortable and really distressed in the presence of your peers. This makes sense in terms of adolescence because friendships become increasingly important during the teen years, where teens experience validation frequently based on their close and intimate relationships. So the question is, are those with anxiety more likely to bully or is the bullying contributing to the anxiety? And the answer is yes and yes. Anecdotally, during distance learning, we had reports from several teens who were confronted face-to-face, what's called traditional bullying in school, who actually reported a decrease in their anxiety because they weren't faced with those who were mean to them on a regular basis or who bullied them. So we could go to the next slide. So the question becomes, could there be a rise in cyberbullying since 2019? And there are several reasons why we should expect or suspect that there might be. There are no peer review articles yet, it's too soon. But we know that as smartphone use and social media use increased with adolescents, that there was an increase in cyberbullying. We know that during the stay-at-home orders, that really the only contact that adolescents had with their peers was either done virtually or through texting or through social media. The other reason why there may be an increase is while parents were at home, parents were working, they were supervising younger children, and while in a day in school, there are usually 6 to 8 other adults who could observe changes in teens' behavior. That level of observation was really constricted when kids were in school. We also know that we had a lot of frustrated teens and bored teens, and sometimes when teens are frustrated or bored, they will take it out on other people. I would be remiss not to mention that experts are surmising that as a result of the recent increase in the social unrest, the pandemic, that the protests for social justice, that there has not or will not be an increase in racial slurs. And the experts report that particularly from Asian and adolescents of color, that there has been a lot of fear. There is one organization that monitors gaming toxicity and cyberbullying, and they're called LIGHT, L-I-G-H-T, and their recent monitoring confirms that there has been an increase in cyberbullying. So given all of that, I cannot emphasize how important it is for adults who have contact, particularly parents at this point, to have discussion with your teens about what is going on, to help them be mindful and attentive to the sensitive nature of these issues. So we can go to the next slide. What I want to talk about here is the reasons why teens are reluctant to acknowledge being bullied. Largely, when you are a target of being bullied, this is hidden and shameful. One of the saddest things is that as the bullying continues, without the teen letting anybody know, that the teen begins to believe that what other people are saying about themselves is true. They begin to internalize the negative statements. And the reality is that it's estimated, depending on the survey, that 30 to 50% of teens do not tell their parents about their bullying. They also fear that things will get worse, and particularly in letting their parents know, they really feel that they're concerned that their access to their electronic devices will be restricted from their parents. One other thing is that during the pandemic, while there's less people observing changes in your child can no longer stop by the student assistance counselor or their guidance counselor or the school psychologist to talk about things that are bothering them. And so, again, these are reasons why we might not hear about it. One other thing that I want to mention is that the concern about how the family responds. And I'm going to talk more about this in the slide following the next. So we could go to the next slide, which is warning signs. And these are warning signs that are in addition to the emotional distress and changes in behavior or exacerbation of anxiety or sadness or hopelessness that I talked about. So if there's an evident increase or decrease in the use of devices, which is certainly hard to decide during the stay-at-home orders, for most of us, we're still spending a great deal of time at home. Emotional responses, if you find that your kids are banging on the table or having strong emotional reactions while they're online, this could be a warning sign. If as you walk by, they hide their screen, they change their screen. If you're monitoring your teens' social media accounts and there's new ones that are being put up and old ones being shut down, or if they're avoiding use of their devices completely. So that includes, by the way, losing interest in activities, whether it's watching TV or talking to friends online. So these are some additional warning signs that there may be some electronic or cyberbullying going on. So we could go to the next slide. Samson, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. This is not the next slide. We want the slide that says when you find out your teen is being bullied. There you go. Thank you. So overall, what's really important is to respond with empathy and validation. The second bullet here says do not over or underreact. So what we don't want to do is to blame our child, to shrug it off, to respond with shock or anger. We really want to temper our response. And this gets back to one of the first things I said, which is very difficult to hear that our children are being hurt. And I don't infrequently hear from teens when they talk about their family's reaction is, what did you do? What did you do to cause this? Or to be angry with them for letting this go on. How could you let this happen? So once you find out, you want to let them know that you're glad that you told them, or you're glad you found out, because it might not be your kids who told you. It might be, typically it comes from a friend of theirs who may talk to a school administrator, who may call you, or a friend may go to a guidance counselor or call the school during the stay-at-home orders. So there's a lot of ways you can find out. And so you want to really be empathetic. Then you want to get the details. You want to talk it through, and you want to brainstorm solutions with them. How could we do? What could we do? Who do we need to involve? And you really want to empower the teens. What most teens say is, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. I just want it to stop. The next bullet, in terms of decreasing teens' isolation, this is really important to know, to find out who is a source of support. What peer do they have that weren't involved? What the research says is that one friend can protect against distress and provide social support to buffer against all of the negative consequences that I discussed, which can help reduce the pain associated with being bullied. And then you need to decide, do I need to seek help? Do I need to talk to someone who can help my teen? You could stay on this slide now. We also need to be concerned with teens who bully others. And there's lots of research, and if you could look down these bullets, these are some of the behaviors associated with kids who bully others. And all of these have serious repercussions that can also impact in a negative way the adolescent's trajectory through their teen years. If you could go to the next slide. So typically, while maybe 50% of teens tell their parents or tell a school counselor or a friend who tells a parent about being bullied, frequently when you find out that your teen is being bullied, it's a call that you'll get from either a school administrator or a counselor or another parent. It is really important to take it seriously. In addition to the consequences that were on the previous slide, the last couple of years, what the research shows, and this is kind of counterintuitive, but what the research shows is teens who bully others have a greater likelihood of experiencing depression and suicidal thoughts. So it is extremely important that we take this seriously and have a conversation and talk this out with our child. So one of the things that you want to do is role play tough situations. What motivated the behavior? Frequently, when kids do this, they do it because it feels good to have other kids following them, to have other kids laughing, to be a leader. And those situations may confront them again, and they need to have other avenues to respond. They need to learn to think before they send off a message that is hurtful or can be considered cyberbullying. The last thing, self-reflection, is extremely important, and this is in terms of parents. What we need to think about if we have a child who's been accused or it's been found out that they have bullied others, we need to think about, do members of our family yell at each other? Do we call each other names? Do we put each other down in ways that could be hurtful? Do our children pick on one another in a way that's beyond normative sibling rivalry? Are they hitting each other? And have our teens been exposed to aggressive behavior in our family between adults? And so the speculation is that for teens who bully others, that there's a likelihood that they have witnessed either aggression in their family and or have been a target of bullying themselves. So there needs to be consequences for this, clear expectations. We need to help these teens understand how serious and harmful their behavior is, and their social media and their texting and their internet really needs to be monitored to protect them, as well as to protect anyone who they've targeted. The ultimate goal with these kids is to build empathy and help them realize how hurtful this is. So the next slide is really how can we reduce harm associated with being bullied, and what could we do to help kids who bullied others to better self-regulate. And so what we want to do is to help them accumulate positive experience. In the short run, do things that are pleasant, and in the long run, make changes. So some of the things that kids find pleasant are drawing or exercise or painting, listening to music, movies. And so in the long run, to encourage this behavior, we may want to give them supplies or access to things that they can do it. The next two things are they need to feel competent, and it could be at some of the things that I suggested, and they need to build mastery over time. And the last thing is to plan ahead, which is like a role play. On the next slide, you can see, and I'm going to wind down in 1 second, this is the last slide, is safety tips. And so these are some safety tips. And the most important is to tell your teen if they receive negative messages, not to respond to them, not to forward them. If things are really serious and you need to call the police, you want to save or take screenshots, and always to use the privacy settings and pause before they post. The last slide is just my closing argument or statement, which is that what we want to do is always to build and foster resiliency. So this message is not to suggest that victims look on the bright side, which would be dismissive and non-empathic, but that good things and good relationships are possible after something like bullying happens to you. And many victims have shared with our counselors and with other people that life can be better after this. The last slide is just resources, which I'll leave up. So much of what I got are from these resources, and my information is here if you should want any further resources.
Thank you, Andrea, for an excellent presentation. There was so much wonderful material. Since we're almost out of time, what I'm going to do is suggest that people who are viewing and have questions, contact Andrea directly. She has her phone number on that last slide. Remember, we'll be posting this Zoom presentation by the end of the day tomorrow, along with the slides. And you can call her, as I said, for follow-up questions or for information. Thank you again for joining us. And I hope that some of you will join us again in the fall. That's going to be on Tuesday, September 8th, the day after Labor Day. Thank you again, Andrea, for an excellent presentation.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.